What is up, guys, and welcome back to the channel. Before we go ahead and get started on today's content, I want to take a moment and dedicate this video to a good friend, Brandon BK Valentine. Sadly, he passed away last Monday and is now in the hands of God. So if you're watching this from above, BK, we all miss you. Now in today's episode, we're going to be continuing on with the power steering work within Project CB9. For those of you who have swapped an H22 engine into your CB7 CB9 Accord, I'm sure you've all faced the power steering pump dilemma. And right now, I'm going to cover the options available to retain power steering and show you what works and what doesn't work. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started. All right, H22 swapped CB9 wagon. And here's a dilemma I'm facing. This is an H22 power steering pump. We've got a CB9 power steering line. This head is much different than the head that's required to go into this pump right here. So before I go ahead and cut this off and attempt to put a splice on this, I'm going to try to put the F22 bracket and the F22 pump onto this H22 motor. Now, some people have gotten away with this. Some people had hood clearances, but the only way to find out is to give it a try. And this is basically where it'll mount to. There's a bolt right there and a bolt right there. Now this third bolt right here, it will not allow it to hold the F22 pump bracket. So here's the F22 bracket and pump. Now this bolt and this bolt will actually line up onto the block, but however this third one will not. So we're going to be predominantly using these two bolts to mount this bracket onto the H22. And what people have done is they've actually made a clean cut and cut the bracket right there and grinded it down a little bit smooth. So you won't have that hook right there, and it'll be kind of relatively straight right there. So that's what I'm going to try to do. I'm going to go ahead and cut this off, clean it up as best I can on the grinder. I'm going to mock this in position, and then we're going to carefully close the hood and see if the hood actually closes. And if it does, then we have great success. And if not, I guess we'll have to cut the line and do a splice. But regardless, I'm going to show you guys what the end results are. So let's go ahead and take the pump off the bracket, clamp this to the vise, and cut this end off right here. Alright, we got success with the electric bandsaw cutting the lip off of this power steering bracket. Now I wanted to follow this line right here, so I started the bandsaw right there against this edge, and it just did its own job, followed this thing straight. This is relatively a straight surface now. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and take the angle grinder, knock off some of these sharp edges. We'll go ahead and get this cleaned up, put some touch-up paint on there, and then mount the power steering pump, put it on the H22, and see if we've got the hood clearance. So let's go ahead and get this thing grinded away. Okay, now here's our modified F22 power steering pump bracket. I basically had to cut this lip off right here because it won't fit on the H22. So I tried to do as clean cut as I could with the electric bandsaw. I think it turned out all right. Went ahead and did some touch-up paint on the side here. Cleaned up the F22 power steering pump right here. And just got back from the yard and got some reservoir to power steering pump hoses. So if this pump and bracket actually works, we can actually go ahead and hook up the hose. And this is what we've been fighting here. This is an H22 power steering pump bracket along with the H22 power steering pump. And the F22 power steering pump head will not go into the H22 power steering pump. So that's our dilemma we're facing. I don't want to cut this off just yet. So we're going to go ahead and check to see if the F22 pump will actually work on this configuration right here. So I need to remove the pump, the bracket, the bolt holding the harness here, and the ground bolt right there. We'll take the H22 assembly off right here and swap it in with the F22, and we'll see what happens. So let's go ahead and take this off. Okay, H22 power steering pump and bracket is officially removed. Got the F22 bracket and power steering pump mocked in position. I've got the bolts snugged up. Pump is in place for right now. It's not very tight, but you know, I've got it in position. So now this is the big moment of truth. If the hood actually closes, so cross your fingers, say a prayer. Let's test fit this hood closing and see if this pump works or not. Well, I thought I had it, but apparently not. Now, when I try to push this hood down to latch it up, this side's not allowing me to do so. It's basically making contact with the power steering pump right here. All right, now here's the culprit. The first time that I was able to shut this hood, this tensioner adjustment here was all the way backwards, which means that I would have to get a power steering belt that is very, very, very tight. And I have basically no room for adjustment on tightening this thing up. So this thing is about 1/3 of the way tightened up right now. I put this thing all the way backwards and obviously it will not shut. But I put it all the way loose to the backside right here, the hood will shut. So this is just too tight of a tolerance right here. I don't think this thing's gonna work because, you know, I'm not gonna be able to get a belt on in the first place. And this thing has to stay in the full loose position. So I don't know how I'm gonna tighten up a belt, but I was so close, yet so far. So I think we're just gonna have to put the H22 pump back on and make the modifications in line. I mean, we were pretty close on this, but apparently it is not working. And I'm not having the luck here like some other people are, but it is what it is, and we tried. So I'm gonna go ahead and take this pump assembly off and put the H22 assembly back on, and then we'll start modifying the line. So failed attempt, but you don't know until you try. And here's our modified bracket with the F22 power steering bracket and the F22 pump, which will not work on my car. And this line right here is the OEM F22 high pressure line. And this is the line we got from the junkyard yesterday from a Honda Prelude. And as you can see here with the metal line, I was making some bends on this to try to mimic the same orientation of the F22 line. Now, it's not gonna reach no matter how much I bend it. So the original plan was to splice into this 3/8 line with a flared fitting. But looking at the orientation of this sensor right here, it's just not gonna work. So it's basically 180 degrees difference right here. And this sensor needs to be plugged in, otherwise you can have a check engine light. And I'm just getting tired of check engine lights. So after using this tube bender on the H22 line, just to try and mimic this whole shape, you still have to do a splice right here. But the sensor is just in the wrong location. It's about 180 degrees off. So we're gonna go ahead and reinstall the modified CB9 power steering line, and hopefully it's just air in the system. So let's go ahead and make the replacement. Okay, this is the F22 OEM power steering hose. We tried to put the F22 pump and bracket in position. It just wasn't working out. Now I went ahead and reinstalled the H22 bracket and pump back in position because the hood just will not close with the F22 pump. For my application, you might have luck, but I sure didn't. So this is the CB9 power steering hose line, and the head is obviously different than that of the H22. So we'll go ahead, remove this CB9 high pressure line right here, disconnect it from the steering box, and then we're gonna reinstall the hose that we originally had on there with the modified coupler from Napa Auto Parts. This has got the correct orientation for the sensor right here. And we're just gonna bleed the system out thoroughly and cross our fingers it was just air in the system. So we'll see what kind of end result we have. And let me go ahead and show you guys what's going on with the H22 modification for that line. Okay, I've got the car raised up with the jack and some jack stands on the frame rails. Anyhow, I've got the cover off of the steering box with 3 10mm bolts. So that's the cover right there. And then right here, this is the line that goes to the power steering pump. Now make sure you use a flare-in wrench for this line right here. You don't want to strip this thing out whatsoever. So this flare-in wrench enables you to grab that bolt with 6 corners right there. So it basically just slides right over the line, lock the wrench in the position, turn it to the left. Okay, now since we're under the car, there's one more step to go. It's hard to see, but there's a line right here, and that line is actually clamped onto the top of the subframe right here with a 10mm bolt. So the best tool to use is this 1/4 inch flex head ratchet with a 10mm. And you can basically just kind of reach up into there, get that socket on position, and loosen that 10mm bolt, and that'll free up the little bracket that's holding it in position on the rear subframe. So let's go ahead and take care of that. Okay, finally got this bracket. It attaches to the rear subframe. And now the power steering line is now loose. And one of the toughest parts is actually feeding this thing through. So as you can see, we got a sway bar in the way. You just get this line pushed up a little bit away from this subframe. Just dripping some power steering fluid there. And then we need to feed it on through the engine bay. This can be a tough part, so I think last time it took me about 20 minutes, maybe even 30 minutes to feed this thing through, so hopefully it goes quicker. I kind of know the trick of the trade. You have to do some twisting and whatnot, so let's go ahead and get this old line out of the way. Okay, fighting with this bracket that holds onto the subframe. Finally got this after about 30 minutes. I mean, you're literally feeling your way up here. Find the hole for the 10mm bolt. And once that little notch in front of the hole is lined up, you can put your 10mm in place and tighten this thing up. And I use a small ratcheting 10mm wrench and also the flex head 10mm ratchet. Also got the 14mm line plugged into the steering box. Gonna go ahead and torque this to spec. And then we'll go ahead and put the cover back in position, and then we're done with the bottom side of the car.
Another year cut off my youth. Yeah, I was born to ride, but fate took off with my high fuel. Oh, everything I always wanted to do is beyond my reach, as I am stuck here in this room. When I come back, will they know my face? Will our freedom lead us back towards our habit of disdain? Oh, if I make it out alive, will you come with me as I ride into paradise? Oh, I feel stronger, 'cause I belong here outside with all the wonders of this life. Oh, I feel stronger, 'cause I belong here outside where all my senses come alive. I've been numb for a while now. It took some time for me to realize I can't pretend.
Okay, here is the consensus with all the experiments I've done with the power steering hose on this H22 swap into Project CB9. The only thing that I've had success with is having the H22 head from the power steering pump and mating it over to the CB9 power steering hose. And the way that you do that, you need to have a special fitting retrofitted on your hose at a hydraulic shop. So this is the only way that I can see success with having a power steering pump on the H22. Now, earlier in the episode, I tried to put the F22 pump and bracket onto the H22 motor, but we had hood clearance issues, so that was not an option. Now the hood would close with the F22 pump and bracket in position onto the H22 motor. But however, when you started to back out that pump in order to put tension on that belt, the hood would not close whatsoever, so that was not an option. So if you've got a hydraulic shop around you, this is probably your best bet in order to put a custom fitting with the H22 line head onto your CB7 CB9 hose. Alright guys, that's all the time we got left for today's episode. We're able to experiment with the F22 power steering pump and bracket, in which I didn't have any success on. Now the H22 pump, bracket, and power steering hose head needs to be utilized when doing an H22 swap on a CB7 CB9 Accord. Now the pump is still making a slight whine sound at idle and with any steering wheel movement, and I'm going to take a look into the resolution for that. Hopefully it's an easy fix, and I'll be sure to let y'all know. If you guys like this video, please give me a thumbs up. For channel updates, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Have a great day.